Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Annalisa and today I am doing a wrap up for the middle grade magic readathon. This readathon is hosted by Yvette of Book Cave, Kara of Wild Book Garden, Kiera the Scrivener, Cozy Reader Kelly, and Yara of Array of Reading. I have 6 books to review for you today and 2 of them aren't even from the readathon, so you can tell how well I did. I've been a bit of a mess the last 2 weeks. And I'm filming this on the 15th, so I might squeeze in one more read the rest of today and tomorrow because it ends on the 16th. But overall, I had a lot more books lined up to read than I actually read. But let's start with the prompts. Each one has a quote. The first one is, "Children need windows and mirrors. They need mirrors in which they see themselves and windows through which they see the world." Dr. Rudline Sims Bishop. And so the prompt for that is read an own voices book featuring a main character who is different from you, and read a book with a main character you share some part of your identity with. And so for the first part of that, I read Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. Specifically, I read the second book, Home, and I liked it quite a bit. Binti is a story about a young African girl from Earth who runs away from home to go to a space academy on another planet and has some run-ins with aliens and adventures along the way, which feature in Binti Book 1. And then in Binti Book 2, Binti comes home because she has been having some anger management issues and generally is not feeling very well psychologically, and so she wants to go home and have a cleansing ceremony to deal with this stuff going on in her mind. And I really liked diving into her tribe and who they are as a people, and this other people who live nearby and associate somewhat with hers but also not. Her people call them the desert people, and they're actually biologically related a lot but don't get along very well. And it was really interesting to see those dynamics and see the lore of her people and how they use her special skill, which is called harmonizing, which is some kind of a math thing where you interact with the universe using math and it like affects things far away. And so that was really interesting and I enjoyed that quite a bit. And then for a character who shares part of your identity, I chose Dragon Pearl by Yoon Lee. And while none of the characters is explicitly autistic in this book, the author is, and I definitely noticed some ways of thinking within the characters that I identified a lot with in that way, and so I felt like that counted for representing me. Basically, Dragon Pearl is one of the Rick Riordan Presents books, and it goes off of Korean mythology, I believe, specifically especially the Gumiho, which is a 9-tailed fox slash a shape-shifting fox spirit. And so the main character and her whole family are these, and this is actually a sci-fi as opposed to a fantasy, but with also fantasy magical elements. Obviously the fox spirit part is more magical, but it is a space opera mostly set in space, where our main character's brother has gone missing while he was out in space training as a cadet on a ship, and our main character goes off to find him, and her super slash magical power is shapeshifting and influencing people, partially in a getting them to agree with you kind of a way, also with a believe in your lies kind of way. So what our little character goes around doing, she doesn't have much power as just a 12-year-old from a poor planet, from a poor family. So she uses her powers to move through the world and pretend to be various people of power so that she can get the places she needs to go and get help she needs. And normally I'm not into like lying as a characteristic. Here's the thing. There's lying to people you're trying to have a relationship with, and you're lying to make things go well for you in that relationship without like having to put effort in, like saying you did something that you didn't do. And then there's lying to people you have no obligation to because you're trying to save someone else, or you're trying to save yourself from being hurt unfairly. That doesn't bother me. So anyway, we get to explore a very interesting world that Yoon Lee has built that has a lot of ideas from mythology, but is also totally his own world. I believe the author uses he, him pronouns because I've seen him written about by someone else. I couldn't find where Yoon Lee specified themselves. But speaking of pronouns, the use of different pronouns and telling people your pronouns is normalized in this book because people have at least all the military people and cops and cadets and things like that all have little badges on them, I assume of different colors or symbols that indicate if they're a he, him, she, her, or a they, them. And there are several non-binary characters, including one of the main secondary ones. And some of the interesting mythological creatures we get to meet include a goblin and a dragon, which in this case, dragons and foxes and tigers have a form as that animal, but also have a human form that they can exist as. So most of the time, our main character exists as a human-looking person. And there is a captain of a ship who is a tiger spirit, but who exists most of the time in human form, and also the dragon spirit does the same thing, but she has blue hair, which I like a lot. And I just really enjoyed it. There are themes of grief and power abuse, and someone else who was just reviewing this brought up that there is also gambling and addiction brought up, which I wouldn't have thought to brought up, but that's a good idea. It's brought up not for very long and shown as a negative thing, but it isn't like addressed in depth at all. But I was very happy with the ending and basically the whole thing. And now I want to read all of Yoon Lee's stuff because this was great, and I am always wanting more autistic authors to read from. The next one that I did do was number 4. If I'm honest, I have to tell you, I still read fairy tales and I like them best of all, from Audrey Hepburn. And this is to read a storytime book, like a fairy tale, folk tale, picture book, etc. And so for that, I have a very strange book, The School for Good and Evil by Soman Chainani. And this is the first book in a series, and I feel like I didn't read very many books in 2 weeks, but to be fair, 2 of them were 500 pages and one of them was this one. And the unfortunate thing about that is that it didn't really have to be 500 and some pages, in my opinion. I felt like it could have been more like a 350 page one because it got a bit repetitive in the middle. So the concept is that there is this village where these storybooks show up magically, and also 2 children go missing every 4 years. And then later on, like quite a few years later on, some of the storybooks that show up will have those children in them. And so the adults aren't sure they believe it, but the children in this village have decided that those 2 children that go missing go off to live in fairy tales, and that one of the children will be good and be taken to a good school to learn how to be better, and one child will be an evil child who will go to an evil school to learn how to be worse. And they actually have that mostly right, it turns out, as 2 children are kidnapped at the beginning of our story. One is named Sophie, who wanted to be kidnapped to go to the good school, and her best friend Agatha, who did not want to be kidnapped, but who Sophie thought probably would be, and would end up at the evil school. Except once they get kidnapped, Agatha goes to the good school, Sophie goes to the evil school. And it basically spends a lot of time establishing what was pretty clear from the very beginning, that Agatha is really nice and sweet despite being kind of ugly, odd, and with black hair, whereas the blonde Sophie is always dresses well and takes care of her skin and pretends to be nice on the outside and is good at fitting in. But she's a really horrible and generally extremely selfish person. And we really only needed a few examples to figure this out. But we keep kind of getting them over and over, and we also are establishing throughout the book that Agatha will stick by Sophie no matter how badly Sophie treats her, and that middle school popularity is fickle because Sophie especially goes from totally unpopular to totally popular, totally unpopular, totally popular, back and forth a lot, because there are other people at these schools, and they haven't come from other normal villages. They have come from fairy tale land, and they are like the son of King Arthur, the kids of the witch who ate Hansel and Gretel, all sorts of different stories. They are the next generation. And we also learn that basically everyone in both schools, the good school and the bad school, are all horrible people except one named Dot. She's pretty nice most of the time. And then there's Kiko, who is a little nice some of the time, and Agatha. Those are the only nice people in the whole book, but I'm pretty sure that that was the point. And a lot of what is looked at is morally gray stuff and how people aren't good or bad, actions are good or bad. And if someone who was destined to be bad ends up doing more good than bad, they're not really evil anymore, and vice versa. And it's a lot more fluid than we have been taught to expect. Sexism in fairy tales slash feudalistic societies was also addressed, where there's a ball, like a school dance, and if the boys go without a date, they get moved back in the class rankings, whereas if the girls don't get a date to this ball, they get failed from the whole school. So it looks at things like that, and it looks at a lot of fairy tale concepts and turns them on their head, and also looks at fate and how do you decide your own fate, or is it all written ahead of time? And so it was really interesting, and I do want to read the next book. But yeah, I hope there is a little bit more editing down and less repetitiveness in it. Then we have 5. Imagination for the child is the miraculous freewheeling device he uses to course his way through the problems of every day. It is through fantasy that children achieve catharsis. From Morrow Sundak. And that is to read a story you would consider fantastical or imaginative. And for that I read Dragon Rider by Cornelia Funke, and this was on audiobook, and this was my second 500 and some pager, and it did take me almost a week, I think, to listen to it. And I also picked this one because the Draconathon is going on, and so I'm trying to also read a bunch of dragon book, and so this one along with Dragon Pearl was helping me towards that. The ASPEC August readathon is also going on, but there's not as much crossover between middle grade and ASPEC representation, so that was a little harder to work in. But Dragon Rider was a bit slow to start. I wasn't very interested in it at the beginning. It just felt slow, and I wasn't too interested in the characters, but as it went on I got more and more interested, and eventually I just really loved the last like 2 hours of it, so like the last 6th or so, and it was just like quite fast-paced at that point, and the characters, we were all figuring out where their development would lead, because the character development along with the plot felt really slow up until then. Even though we were traveling the world and finding lots of different magical creatures, I just didn't care that much about it until it got towards the end and we saw how the arcs of the various characters came to fruition. And so my favorite part ended up being the characters. The world building was pretty good, but a little so-so. I liked reaching back to some of the classic ideas about brownies and homunculi and dwarves, and it just felt really nice to be reading about those along with dragons. And once we got to the end, it did remind me more of my childhood and like Dragon Rider prophecy lore that was just really fun. Plus there was a whole lot of found family going on. Number 6 is if someone had taken that book out of my hand and said, "You're too old for this," maybe I'd never have believed that someone who looked like me could be in the pages of a book, that someone who looked like me had a story. And that was from Jacqueline Woodson. And that was talking about what it meant to her as an adult to see, I believe she was talking a black girl who was in a middle grade book, or it might have been a children's book, and how reading young people's stories is still really helpful to adults. And so the prompt is to read a book by a marginalized author you think will bring you joy, and I decided to double up on Dragon Pearl with that one. Okay, other books I read in the last 2 weeks are A Song Below Water by Bethany C. Morrow, and I read this because I had gotten it and meant to read it in July, but ran out of July before I ran out of books for July. So I just read it in like the first 3 days of August, and I absolutely loved it. I love the mythology. I love the world building, the different magical creatures. I'm gonna end up comparing a lot of things to the Mercy Thompson series, basically because it is the first urban slash contemporary fantasy that I have really enjoyed. Like most of the time I much more enjoy either historical or totally otherworld fantasy. The Mercy Thompson series was the first one that I really liked, and so as I am now finding more contemporary fantasy that I enjoy, I'm gonna I'm gonna end up comparing it back to that. And the way that this one compares is that it is in a alternate contemporary where some magical creatures have come out to the public, and the public knows about them and the government knows about them and is trying to like figure out how to deal with them because they have some kind of superpowers. And there are also some mythological creatures that are in the closet, or if not as a whole, then some of the individuals, because they don't want to be mistreated by the government, because that's how the government is treating the ones that are already out. And in this case, some of the ones that are out are sirens, and one of our main characters is a siren, but she personally is not out, and it's a really big secret that only her family knows, and so there's a lot of stress surrounding that. And then there are these other people who are like magically super likable and have a little bell, but these are like the good supernatural creatures that everybody likes and that are socially acceptable, and then the sirens are the ones that are not socially acceptable and are considered to mostly be criminals because they can use their voice to compel people, which will make them do what you tell them to for a short period, and then they will remember that you compelled them to do that. So some of the sirens that are out to the public wear a collar that like magically nullifies that power, and this freaks out a lot of other sirens because super creepy. And so there's just a lot of political talk about that going on. Meanwhile, this main character and her sort of adoptive sister who lives with her, that was very confusing for the first 3/4 of the book. Why is she living with you instead of when she has perfectly healthy grandparents who could have had her live with them? But it's not really explained until the very end, so I can't tell you much about it. But anyway, both of these main characters are just trying to go to high school. So this is a YA type book, but all this magical stuff keeps happening around them because one of our sisters is a secret siren and the other one just has sprites, which are a different type of magical creature that no one can seem to control or limit, just hang around her a lot and have caused some very nasty havoc around her when she was a child that has mentally scarred her pretty badly. And so they've got lots of both magical and regular teen drama to deal with, along with being black girls in, I believe, a majority white school in Portland. And so we follow them learning more about themselves and the siren characters' magic and how it works, and her past, because the siren character is very cut off from the side of her family that has a siren magic because of a schism in the family, and the other sister's past is very mysterious because her mom never told her who her dad was, and her grandma won't tell her who her dad was, and so now she has neither parent because her mom passed away from cancer, and so she has a lot of mysterious background. There's also a gargoyle perched on their roof for some reason, and I just really liked all these different magical creatures and the way that actual societal issues like racism interact in this world with also the only people who are sirens are black women. So there's a lot of intersectionality with that they have it even worse than non-magical black women who already have more problems than black men and white women. And so there was a lot of talk about that, but it didn't feel overbearing. It felt very natural because it was an integral part of these people's lives. And we also got to explore some Ren Fair stuff because the non-siren sister is into Ren Fairs and is a mermaid in a Ren Fair, so that was very cool. So I really liked all these aspects. The ending, where we found out more about the non-siren sisters' background, was super interesting. I loved it. It's super spoilery, but also totally awesome and like the best part of the book. So if you just hold on to find out about that mystery, it is totally worth it and I love it. Then we have The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie by Jennifer Ashley, and this one was because I was trying to make TBR for the Monsterthon next month, and one of the prompts is to read a book with a disabled character, and so I wanted to have one to read and also one to recommend, and I wanted to have more different ones to recommend because I've read less than I would like. And so I went back to Noria's videos about 20 books with disability, and she actually has 2 of those, so there are 40 books with disability that she recommends, and I was specifically looking for books featuring autistic characters because I have read very few and I would like to read more, and I would like to be like a compendium of autism related books for people to reference, and also be an Own Voices reviewer because that is particularly helpful. So one of the ones that Noria said had autism rep was this book. It was written back when Asperger's and autism were separated diagnoses, so the author says he has Asperger's, and I love this book so much. I read it in a day when I was supposed to be reading The School for Good and Evil. That's why I read it in the middle of a readathon for middle grade. Trigger warnings for the background of Ian is that he was in an asylum from when he was 9 till 17 and was very badly treated, because this is set in the 1800s and they were bad in the 1900s. They're not great now. They were really bad in the 1800s. And this is lightly described, but it is mentioned throughout the book. And normally that's very triggering for me. But it is a lot worse when it's visual, I found, when it's in like a movie or a TV show, like Call the Midwives features talking about that a few times and shows people being mistreated in asylums, and that's very, very upsetting for me, so I skipped those. But it wasn't as bad in book form, especially because it was flashbacks. If it had actually taken us through narrative times of being in an asylum, I don't think I would have been able to deal with that. So warning if that gives you trouble. But there are really wonderful platonic relationships throughout this book. A lot of times my favorite relationships in romance books are actually the platonic relationships, because a lot of romance authors will make like a family and then they'll write one romance book for each family member. So in this case there are 4 brothers, so I think she's written one romance for each of these brothers, and then sometimes they will also have like the in-laws get their own set of books, and so we get to have a lot of these sibling relationships and in-law relationships, and I think those are really precious, and there were a lot of those. In this case we also had a single parent who had lost his wife when his son was born, and now the son is in his mid-teens, I believe, and we get to see their interactions, and also this kid's interactions with his new aunt-in-law, and the 4 brothers deeply, deeply caring about each other. And platonic relationships between men are very precious to me, because a lot of times in our society men are not allowed to show affection for each other, so that's very special to me to reinforce, which is another reason that men should read romance books aimed at women. And I identified a lot with Ian. He does this thing where he gets caught when he's staring at something that is nice, like something that's round. He'll just stare at it, or something that's shiny, especially like eyes or drops of ink, and he'll dissociate while he's looking at that. I don't have that problem, so I couldn't tell if that was like good representation or not, but a lot of other things very much were. The whole taking things literally, not being impressed with social conventions, getting straight to the point. He had a special interest of Ming bowls, not Ming vases, just Ming bowls. And that was really cool. I really loved the depiction of that. And there is a mystery element in this one, which a lot of romances will have some kind of danger element where somebody's after them, or there was a murder and we have to solve it. This one I really liked that aspect and felt like it was really well done, and was actually mysterious and not just, oh, I totally know what happened, why don't the characters understand? And there's also a former sister-in-law to these brothers who stays with them and stays their friend and interacts with them and comes to their parties and their weddings and such. And I thought that was really special and precious, because she cared so much about her extended in-law family that it wasn't just her husband that was tying her to them. There is discussion of eye contact, or lack thereof, in this book, and it is talked about at the end of the book that Ian is trying to make more eye contact with his wife because it's special to her, which is a little worrying because of how uncomfortable it makes us. It's not really something we overcome, it's just, it's always going to make us feel uncomfortable. Like, I have noticed the person that I'm closest to, my mom, I make hardly any eye contact with. I make a lot more with people I'm less close to because I'm worried about making them understand that I'm listening and then I'm paying attention to them. Whereas with my mom, we just talk to each other. Sometimes when we're sitting in a car going, we don't have to look at each other because she's looking at the road and I'm looking at the stuff going by outside, or we're sitting at a table and there's other stuff to look at. We just don't look into each other's eyes that much unless one of us is trying to get the other's attention for some reason. So it really is possible to engage with someone deeply without staring into their eyes. And it's not necessarily something that needs to be overcome. Though, of course, sometimes we can do it, even if it's a struggle. If it's causing them more pain to not be connected with on that level than it causes us to make the eye contact, then that's like a trade that makes sense. But it doesn't need to be done all the time. It can be a special occasion type thing. Anyway, that's all the books. What readathons are you planning on taking part in or are currently taking part in? Because I've got a lot on my plate. Monsterathon is next month. Demonathon is next month. Badass Bitches or something is next month by Neeks. I'll link information about these below, but there are a lot of really cool readathons and I don't think I can do all of them. But the Monsterathon is my favorite, so I hope you'll join me in that. I also haven't been engaging about any of these 3 readathons I've been doing on Twitter because I've just been exhausted from various anxiety and social stuff and blah going on. So hopefully in the next 2 weeks and then the month after that, I will engage more on Twitter because that's like half the fun of a readathon. We shall see what happens. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!